Okay, close those, and we are off. All right, so thank you again, everyone. I've been dealing with a little bit of technical difficulties this morning, so bear with me. Looks like everyone can hear me. Thank you, Jim, for letting me know. Everyone should be able to see the screen at this point as well. And I guess I'll just begin. So today's session is all about Social Security. In the past, sessions that we've done typically cover a specific area of planning, like retirement or life insurance. This fits into all of those, but we thought it would be helpful, given that we will be adding some features to our tool here related to this, to kind of review this topic as a whole, and talk through some of the basics and some of the things that you guys will be taking with you into your meetings with clients and prospects, right? So again, my name is Paul Reed. It's my pleasure. I've been here with Advisys as in some form or fashion for about 8 years now. I get to work with a lot of financial planners and professionals to talk about what they do, how they present to clients. And my job really is to kind of help relate the topics that you guys are covering into stories that make sense, into things that make sense to you, so you can feel confident about the topic that you're discussing with the individual, right? So today it's all about Social Security, like I said, and this is something that I've personally presented, probably 50 different times in all different kinds of ways. So although I'm not, an official expert, I probably am pretty close to knowing what there is to know about how Social Security works. And that's all from the things that we have in the tool as well. So hopefully you guys will get something out of it today as well. Before I dive in, I always like to start with just kind of a reminder that topics like this, although they're not directly, you're not selling Social Security, right? So there's not always a product at the end of the conversation or at the end of the question. But a lot of times we have to remember that part of what we're doing is providing a sense of community and safety to the people around us, by giving answers and providing guidance, to some of these unknowns like Social Security. A lot of people understand just kind of the periphery of it, but your job is obviously to provide them with a little deeper sense. So I always like to start with just a reminder that this is a reciprocal relationship, right? You need them, they need you. Without community, there is no business. So, consider that relationship a symbiotic one. Understand that there's not always going to be a hard product sale at the end of your conversation, but you are always hopefully providing some sort of value, right? That should be at the heart of what you're doing. We're answering questions for the sake of knowledge, not for the sake of always making money. And that should be, very evident to the individual as well. And this is a really good topic to kind of illustrate that, because it's universally applicable, right? This is a conversation that everyone is probably going to have or have questions on. Even if you are a government employee and you don't necessarily pay into a traditional, Social Security structure, there's still questions you're going to have, and still things that you're going to need to be able to walk them through, right? So little quote at the bottom, obviously you guys have seen it there kind of floating. It's about compassionate actions in your community. And sometimes, just helping with general finances or general financial guidance is one way to do that. So a little bit about what we'll be covering specifically today with respect to Social Security. First, we'll go into a little bit of the fundamentals. What is it? When your benefits paid, who gets it, that sort of thing. How much does it pay? How is that kind of stuff calculated? Those are all really things that, the average individual has no idea on, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. The reason for that is, just like in sports, fundamentals are very important because it shows that you have a depth of understanding that, you can guide them through, some of the things that are basic to you, but maybe not so basic to them, right? The next thing is, how do you communicate this concept and this conversation in different areas of planning, right? How do you address the concerns that they're going to have over, Social Security in those different areas? And by different areas, I really mean like retirement planning, both as a younger person who's more into the accumulation phase, as well as, someone who is approaching retirement. All of these have different angles of viewing Social Security that come with different concerns. So we want to be able to address those. And then secondarily to that, we also want to be able to create engagement around that. We want them to get kind of curious about the topic and about planning as a whole. That's a large way how you, I guess, avoid disengagement, which is, everyone's worst enemy when it comes to client relationships. We want them to want to talk to us, even if it's problems. I listened to a great podcast yesterday talking about how they get referrals. And one of the questions they asked was about what they're doing wrong. So it's just about creating a dialogue, even if it's, an unknown, there's still a way to create engagement around that, right? So, and then the last piece to it is, how do we help them maximize benefits? That's kind of the big ask, when we're talking about Social Security, is how do I get the most out of it? What are the things that I need to do to position myself to benefit from it? So we'll talk a little bit about how Advisys helps to optimize that, both within the retirement and life insurance spaces. And then lastly, we're actually going to be releasing next month, or I think it's the 16th, but definitely before the end of the year, a brand new needs analysis within the tool that tackles Social Security as a whole. And we'll kind of, if you guys hang around to the end, I'll preview that and show you a little bit of what's going to be in there, right? But for today, this is kind of what to expect. Some high-level review, some tactics on conversation, and then some practical examples of, how this plays out in an analysis or, presentation type format. All right, so the fundamentals of Social Security. This is, again, a very good starting off point as a conversation precursor to, any of the secondary selling points that you're going to be having. This is a good jumping off point because it universally applies to, I'd say 80–90% of people, if you're not, again, in that government offset or, WEP situation, which we'll talk about as well. But as a whole, we want to help people understand what are the key components, what are the things, the variables, if you will, that matter to you when it comes to talking about Social Security, right? So first of all, what is it? Where does it come from? Everyone kind of knows that it's like when you get old, you get it, or maybe if you get disabled, there's some general knowledge about that. But kind of explaining that where it comes from is this OASDI, Old Age Survivors Disability Benefit. Right. So those are primarily the areas of your life that you're going to maybe rely on a program like Social Security. And then secondarily, it's primarily funded by your payroll tax. So everyone pays into this, just like, I guess your medical plan or whatever. It's my opinion on it is that I'm not relying on it, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But, it's kind of a setup where you pay into it and you get something out of it when you need it. Right. But what you get out of it is kind of really dependent on the situation. First off, you need to be qualified for benefits. Depending on the type of benefit, there's different qualifications, right? You either need to be fully insured or currently insured. And then I've given some information about what it means for that. 40 credits is about 10 years of working to become fully insured. That's for stuff like, your retirement benefit, et cetera. But being currently insured, meaning you're working, regularly or 6 credits over the last 13 quarters, qualifies you for some other things like disability insurance, right? So just understanding how it is that you qualify. Some people are like, well, I didn't apply for that. I'm not paying for that. Well, you don't need to. If you work at a, normal 9-to-5 jobs, chances are you're probably paying into it, and you see that taken out of your paycheck each time as SSDI or whatever the little tag is for it, right? The next thing we want to help them understand is probably what was the biggest surprise to me when I came on board at Advisys, which is the types of benefits that are available, because they're pretty widespread, right? There are workers' benefits, there's spouses' benefits, and widow or widowers' benefits. There's a child benefit, there's a mother and father benefit, and there's a parent's benefit. All of these are paid in different ways and scenarios, and you can kind of start to see where it gets a little bit more complex than I pay in and I get something out, right? There's calculations for each of these benefits, and how is it calculated? Well, that's again at a high level, but it's 2 things. It's based on your earnings record, how much you made over the time period, right? It's running a scale, and then it's based on a calculation called the primary insurance amount. But secondarily to that, there are also limits to it. So if you're making over a certain amount, you're going to get capped. If you have 5 kids, there's going to be a limit to the amount that you can take out in survivor benefits, right? Or a widow benefit. There's limits to that, but we'll go into that a little bit more when we talk about the material as a whole. Really, the key components are very basic, but if you can start here, then maybe you'll find out a lot of discovery in financial planning. I found is really about a litmus of what does the individual know and how adept are they to the topics that you're going to be covering, right? If they're clueless about Social Security, chances are they're probably not that well versed in some of the other areas that you're going to want to talk to them about, and you're going to probably want to take an educational approach to each of those, right? But this is a good litmus for, hey, what do you understand? What do you know? And, hey, maybe you know some, but you don't know all, right? So let's fill in those knowledge gaps. That's a good way to build trust and rapport with individuals. It's a good way to kind of get on the same page as far as what to expect in your process for planning, right? The next slide here is really just about kind of understanding percentages. This is a high-level look. This is actually directly from an Advisys report that talks about how and what percentage of the PIA you'd be eligible to receive in different circumstances, right? You see death, disability, retirement, and then the different benefits labeled out there, right? So a lot of people will be surprised to find out that they get a huge benefit if they die early from the government, but then there's things like the blackout period and understanding some of those other factors that we're going to want to discuss with them, right? So at a high level, it kind of starts with just understanding who gets what and when and how much, right? But within each of these areas that Social Security really applies, there's different problems and solutions that we're trying to solve for, right? It's not all just, we don't have to necessarily go into talking about it A to Z. We can say, hey, what's the individual's concern? Right? Are we there talking about life insurance or asset protection, if you will? Are we talking about saving for retirement? Are we talking about getting ready to retire? Are we talking about what is my situation because I work for the government or I have some sort of exclusion, right? So the problem if you're dealing with asset protection is that people times rely too heavily on the policy that their employer provides or the government benefits that they know they're going to be entitled to and may not understand fully the limitations of those things, right? Usually the employee policies are a small amount, maybe enough to cover burial expenses. But what about ongoing child expenses or daycare or, any of the things that come out of losing a loved one who is also, responsible in the home? So even if you're a financial planner, this was a big focus this last year on making sure that you're talking about asset protection as a whole and where the exposures are, right? So if there's kind of a misunderstanding here, here's a really good way to bring up Social Security because if they have young children, you're going to want to explain the blackout period and how survivor benefits work overall. We just saw on the previous slide, that there's a percentage that they get of the earner's PIA. Right. But then there's also two benefits that they're receiving for a period of time. So you're really going to want to be able to kind of drill down on that if need be to help them understand where the gaps might be. Right. The second thing is if you're younger and you're saving for retirement, you may not want to rely on Social Security. That's kind of my bucket. I don't know how long, unless they do something about it, there's going to be money in there. Right? They actually had, I think I saw the other day, they probably a larger COLA than usual this year at like 3.25 or something like that percent. But overall, this is kind of where your personal philosophy comes into play to say, hey, you know what are we going to do to make sure that we don't have to rely on Social Security? If it's there for me, great. But I'm going to try to better understand my needs for setting realistic savings goals. Being a little bit more aggressive as a younger person is not an easy sell nowadays, but helping them understand the math behind it or helping them understand how, not having Social Security at all what that might make their plan look like is a really good way to kind of help them be realistic and set the right kind of goals, right? But all through the lens of, hey, what do you think about this program? A lot of people rely on it. It can pay you a good amount of money, but, here, let's talk through it, right? That's kind of the point of that area. If you're a little bit closer to retirement age, it's all about timing it and making sure that your assets are positioned in a way that you don't have to or need to take it early. Because as we'll talk about, there's penalties to doing that, right? If your full retirement age, considering the government is, 65, and you decide to take the benefit as soon as possible at 62, not only, do you not get as much over time, but you're having a reduction in your benefits up front, right? So we want to help them plan for their assets to support the client during those early years so that we can maximize their benefits. That's the term, right? Maximizing that benefit from Social Security. And then lastly, if we're not paying into Social Security, or if we had a job for a period of time where, there's going to be an elimination provision applied to the benefit that we receive, then you're going to want to be able to understand that, because that's something that a lot of people, some people just assume everyone gets Social Security. And most places do a pretty decent job of educating them when they're not. If you're playing into, if you're at a nonprofit, or something like that, there's a lot of different niche, I guess, tools out there, or products out there to help them save. But usually it kind of tends to fall on the responsibility of the employer to provide that information, right? Especially if you work for the government. So if that's a situation, your value and your solution is really helping them better quantify what eligibility they do have and what type of offsets there might be, or at the very least, helping them understand why there are offsets, right? That's really sometimes the value. I can't change the reality of the situation all the time, but I can better inform you and educate you so that you can make the right decision. That's a lot of what we hope to do, even just by bringing up Social Security as a whole. I want to educate you because it touches all these things. And knowing how it touches all of these things makes you smarter and more equipped as a client, right? This is my pitch to the client to handle what's going to come down the road, right? So let's talk a little bit more about retirement specifically. Now, all of this material this next slide that I'm going to show you, I directly pulled from material that's in our tool. I just chose to format it in a real simple visual slide way, which you guys can also do. And I just took the bullet points that I thought were relevant, but I'll show you how one can go to the other. You can use a slide like this to present to someone, right? We're talking about the different strategies of retirement claiming, but then you can back it up with a take-home report that has that same information on it, maybe in a little bit more detail, that reinforces what we're talking about, right? So I'm kind of just going to use this as an example of the way I present it versus the way the Advisys tool gives you to explain the topic as well, right? So here's my strategy breakdown. Option 1, you can retire early. You can retire and take benefit as early as 62. However, there's this weird reduction that happens. And the calculation is kind of funky, and you're probably not going to want to do it yourself. The tool will do it for you. But it's reduced by 5/9 of 1% for each month up to the first 36 months that you take it early, right? And then an additional 5/12 of a month of 1% is applied for each month in excess of 36 months. Even trying to go like, that makes my brain kind of go, The point is that when you take retirement early, or you decide to take your benefit early, you are taking a reduced benefit. And we have a chart that shows it's about 75% of your benefit, right? The next option is delayed retirement. That's really the opposite. And by that, I mean, if you wait, you get more, right? So we can say that this exists from full retirement age beyond. And the beyond really depends on how long you wait to take that. You can wait up until 70 and receive an 8-year bump for each full year that you wait to take that benefit. So for some people, that's like 124%, right? And I don't know about you, if I were to ask someone just plainly at this point, would you rather have 75% of something or 124% of something? I think we kind of know where people will lean. So that's why I said before, it's important to have that conversation about how are we positioning your assets? Are we making sure that you have money that's available to support you those first couple years so that we can let that benefit accumulate over time and grow, right? To maximize that. The next option is, hey, what if I want to take benefits, but I'm still going to work? Right? That's a lot more common nowadays because there's all kinds of side gigs and, Etsy shops and Instagrams and, whatever socials people are monetizing nowadays. You can get money in a lot of different ways. However, you need to understand that if you're going to do that in retirement, if your dream is to have a YouTube channel where you do your woodworking and you get a bunch of subscribers and you're able to monetize it, that there's a chance that you're going to have your benefits reduced, right? If you make in excess of $21,000, and you're under your retirement age, there's going to be a ding, $1 for every $2 in excess, right? Same thing if you're over retirement, but a little bit less, you'll have a reduction from full retirement age, $1 for every $3 in excess of a higher dollar amount here, $56,000 for 2023, right? So again, all of this information pulled directly from there. But if we're walking someone through this, think of how you want to present the information in a way that is concise and that speaks to their learning modality, right? The way they absorb information. If they are a detailed person, great. You use the detailed report. I'm a bullet point guy, so I like to see information like this and I absorb it a little bit more easily this way. So option 4 is what happens if you're unmarried, right? Well, this is just kind of basic guidelines. This is if you claim early, you get less. If you claim later, you get more. There's not really much more to it, right? However, the opposite is true if you're a married couple. There are more options to claim because let's say you retire and your benefit is more, but then all of a sudden your spouse dies and they were making a lot of money. Did you know that you could then claim survivor benefits after the fact? And potentially maximize that even more. So there's some different ways that you can claim when you're married versus when you're an individual, right? Now, there used to be a lot more options. I think it's been a while now, it's been about 8 years, but they phased out some of the other options that you had, like restricted application. I think they call it claim now, claim more later, or file and suspend. I imagine there's very few people who aren't taking benefits at this point. Since it was 2015, you had to be at least 62 at that age to do a restricted application, and no one can do file and suspend. So really, it's more about understanding the different benefits you're eligible for and knowing when to file for which, right? So we can talk a little bit more about that. But as a whole, high-level look, there's the different ways that you can claim your retirement benefits. Now, Social Security applies to survivorship as well, as we mentioned. So, there's not as many options. It's more about the timing and kind of understanding the limitations of. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go into some practical examples and look at the Advisys tool and kind of some of the things that are in here to discuss this, right? So as usual, in these type of webinars, if you haven't seen, okay, so now it says my screen sharing is paused. Okay, I have to new share and do the whole screen, huh? Okay, glad I caught that. So you guys should be seeing the program now. And what I've done is I've kind of pulled together the material that we have in here to date that talks about Social Security, right? I'm going to breeze through a couple of these and I'll drill down in some of the others. This one, for example, really was essentially my 4-quadrant slide where we're talking about who gets it, what benefits are available, et cetera, right? So when you're presenting to an individual and having this conversation about Social Security, this is a good place to start always, an overview. Who gets it and why, right? We have a couple different reports that talk about that. A separate report talks more specifically about the retirement benefits, what it means to be fully insured, how PIA is calculated, and a little bit about when to take it, right? So this, again, great high-level look at some of the information I just covered. The point of the report, I should say, is really to prompt the question and to make sure that they have a baseline understanding so that when you go into some of the calculations that are involved around when they're going to receive the benefit, how that fits into their retirement plan, you're able to kind of say, hey, here's why you're seeing this, that, or the other, right? So we go into more detail in some of the reports that talk about earlier delayed. Here's that chart that I mentioned before where we're talking about, if you're born in these timeframes, and most people probably that we're talking to nowadays are somewhere in this bottom range, right? It means that if you're taking full retirement age, that's age 67 for you. That means that everything is relative to that age as it pertains to what type of benefit you receive. So you can get as low as 70%, I was a little off, of your benefit if you take it at 62, and as high as 124% if you wait, right? So here's just a matrix report as a way to kind of illustrate that. Visual, simple, not much to not understand, right? Same thing when it comes to claiming strategies for married couples. A lot of people heard about some of those things that I mentioned, like file and suspend, and you want to be able to explain why they're not available anymore, not just that that they're not, right? So this goes into the basic ground rules for claiming. And really all 3 or 4 of these are high level first conversation about Social Security. As you talk about how it pertains to their individual situation, then we'll use more calculations and some of the numbers to kind of back that up, right? And the first way we do that is, or the first way we can do that, I should say, is with a break-even calculator. This is a very simple, probably one of the most popular reports that we have in the tool. And the general idea is if you were to decide how you wanted to calculate the benefit, and then you were to decide on 2 different ages as well as a mortality age, we can kind of show you as an estimate what you stand or what the individual stands to have from the different ages that they might take that benefit at. again, making it tangible, something that they can kind of sink their teeth into or wrap their mind around, is a really important thing for that engagement, that client engagement component, is making it realistic for them. So here's a really good example, because waiting to 70 means that you get about 49,000 in initial benefit versus just 24,000. Right? That, if you're dying at 90, or even let's just say 85, it'll move the line a little bit, but means that you stand to benefit if you can position your assets in such a way where you don't need to claim for those 8 years, right? But your break-even point is 78, you'll have received more. So if you think you're going to live past then, which the average life expectancy nowadays is, I think, right around there for men, then it's worth the conversation, right? To figure out what to do with respect to how to time that, right? Then, if they're still unsure, we can talk a little bit more about that. Here's just kind of a different way to explain which is better or late, right? Early or late. Now, how does that fit into actual retirement planning though? Well, depending on what their situation is. Now, this is one of the pages from our retirement analysis. This is the one pager that kind of explains all the needs on the single page. The easy way to kind of see the practical application of that is just to show them, hey, if you're taking it at 62, you have a shortfall still of 861,000 that you're going to need to we're going to need to deal with. However, if you wait to 70, and all I'm going to do is change this, and the system will calculate the benefit automatically for me, I can show them kind of just the simplicity of how that reduces the shortfall that they have. That's $300,000 difference less that they'll need at retirement if they wait to 70. We haven't done anything else. We haven't saved any more money. We just waited to take it, right? Now at 67, that just means that they're going to be drawing on some of their retirement money up front. And when we get to that, closer to that age, there'll be other questions that come about that, right? But as a whole, we're just trying to make the case for how and why it's important to plan around this topic, right? So really easy way to show that is kind of one of the things that makes Advisys great is it's simple to kind of illustrate what happens if I change this, that, or the other, right? Even if I just change their retirement age to 70, which means 3 more years of earned income, right? All of these what ifs become very easy to kind of show them, wow, if I just work to 70, we have no shortfall at all. So I'm going to change that back just to illustrate the next report, which I think is kind of relative to Social Security, but I think I always just like to show it because it's the natural next step in the conversation is, okay, I have a shortfall. Well, what can I do besides, take Social Security later? Well, you can do only really 4 things. You can save more, you can earn more, you can spend less, or you can retire later, right? As we saw when I changed it to 70, that eliminated their shortfall entirely. But the key is that we may want to just do some of each of these. That's the real nitty gritty of what you're doing with them, is deciding the minutia of which areas that you're going to take those steps in, right? Maybe we're going to be a little more aggressive with our assets. Maybe we're going to consider retiring at 68 instead of 67. All of those kinds of things are just going to fall out of some of these conversations, right? Just like that, we also can go back to talking about how work affects Social Security. One of the reports that I don't have in here, but is probably part of everyone's process at this point, if you're talking about retirement, is what does retirement look like to you? What does peace of mind look like? What's fulfillment look like? All of those things. Do you want to be the guy with the boat who's out on the lake every day? Do you want to be the guy with the woodworking shop who, just makes things all day? All of those matter because, again, the reduction in those benefits. So here we give an example. We give a couple different examples of how benefits can be reduced if you're working and earning, right? A special rule also applies. So there is also some more minutia as to what goes into this, right? Also, what is counted as earnings? If you're babysitting or getting paid, different ways, there's going to be some kind of questions around that. What doesn't count as earnings? So we go into all of that. This is a really great report because as the landscape of retirement really changes and people start to look for, because we're feeling more youthful at retirement or we're able to retire earlier, these are all kinds of things that maybe weren't asked as much when the goal was we worked for 45 years and we kind of just sit on the porch, spend time with their grandkids, travel a little bit. It's a lot more complex than that. So being able to explain and understand things like how benefits that are withheld or restored, is a really valuable thing to be able to impart on the client, right, or prospect. So just right in hand with that, what about tax? There's always going to be a taxation. We give you a really simplified worksheet to kind of give them that illustrates how Social Security benefits are taxed, right? When it comes to, so that's really kind of how retirement plays in, right? Where you can bring it up, how it fits into, you know, what they're gonna, when they're gonna take it. We have a question from Robert here before I move on from retirement. Working at full retirement age and taking Social Security benefits, other than taxes, there's no penalties, correct? Past full retirement age, if I'm remembering correctly, let me go back to the work portion here. Yeah, no limit. That's right here. And this is right exactly where it shows that. So once the month your FRA is reached, there's no exemption amount and no loss of benefits as well. So thank you for that clarification. There's not a permanent loss of benefits. So again, maybe you wait to start that business. Maybe you change your strategy on how much you ramp up your earnings until that age, right? So just kind of being aware of the different thresholds and how they affect the benefit. So thank you, Robert, for getting that clarity on there. Okay, so again, that's kind of the retirement component to it. Just as important is the asset protection component. This is something that, you know, if you have kids, you've thought at one point or another, what would happen to them if I wasn't around? I have identical twin daughters who are 10. I know that I think, like, you know, it'd be devastating, not just emotionally, but financially, you know, they rely on me. So, you know, what does that look like? How does Social Security protect against that kind of thing? Where are the limitations? This is a really good way to kind of tee that up, right? Is we want them to understand that you do receive a benefit. In fact, you're going to receive probably more than you think, but there's a period where that stops, right? And then again, where you can pick up. So let's explain that from front to back. There's a couple different reports in the tool that do that very well. How do you qualify? Again, the individual who passes away needs to have been fully insured, right? So if they're not working or have never worked, you're not going to get survivor benefits, unfortunately. So just kind of understanding some of the ins and outs to that. Again, what you qualify for will depend on where you fall into these categories. And the percentage that you'll receive also depends on that category, right? So this is one paragraph each. I love these reports, and I've been with this company 8 years. And for those of you who are subscribers and use this stuff, I'd love to hear from you if you have success stories. You know, I know I run into people all the time at conferences that stop and say how much they love what this kind of does, but I can't understate how hard it is to kind of boil some of these concepts down to a paragraph sometimes and feel like you're hitting all the key points. So I love this report because it does just that, explains who gets what and when. The widower benefit and parent benefit are the surprising ones to me. I mean, sorry, not the parent benefit. The parent benefit and the child benefit makes sense. Widower and child makes sense. The parent benefit is the one that kind of always surprised me. I really didn't understand that could even be a thing. This is also a very interesting thing that the product developer laughs at all the time, and I think people will get a kick out of. If it's not a little sad, it's at least a little humorous, which is you also receive $255 for your life, I guess. I don't know exactly what it's for, right? You get a one-time lump sum payment of $255. If anyone has any, you know, humorous stories or you know, ways that they've kind of addressed that question before, I'd love to hear it, because that's always one I'm like, huh? Why? Just why? So that's, again, things that just showing your breadth of knowledge is kind of what these reports are meant to do, is kind of explain it all, keep it high level, keep it understandable so that people get, you know, the point. Lastly, with this, there is a maximum. Again, if you have 5 kids, you may receive some sort of benefit for the children, but there is a limitation, there is a cap, right? And what I will say is that in the tool here, depending on how you're calculating the Social Security benefits and whatnot, everything will be accurate in here as far as what the caps are, you know, if they're earning at the earning maximum, or if they have, you know, children in excess of the number the benefit that you can receive, all of that will be calculated into here and personalized for the individual, right? So again, really easy way to kind of show how Social Security affects someone in a survivorship scenario or in a life insurance scenario. One-page graph, right? If we're looking closely, the green is what I want to pay attention to is here's your Social Security benefit. Someone dies. Let's say his name is Paul. And in our example, his name is Paul, like mine. Paul leaves your office today, gets hit by a bus. Tomorrow you can file for survivor benefits and you'll get some money to help offset the cost of Paul's, death. He also, his employer had some life insurance benefits. So those will be there to cover your immediate needs. But overall, at some point, you're going to hit that blackout period we talked about, right? And I can show this in the graph or I can show it in the timeline. I like the timeline for this because it's a really good way to kind of explain the cost to benefit, right? I say that the premium is $20, $30 a month for this policy, right? But what it's going to do is going to solve a $4 million problem for them. So what we're talking about is the fact that at a certain point, the Social Security runs out, and that's when the kids turn 18. So they're not going to get that benefit anymore till she's of retirement age. Then she can claim that benefit again, right? That survivor benefit, if it's more than what she would get, or she can claim her own benefit, as we talked about before. But there's this big gap that causes a shortfall to occur, right? And that's not the only reason the shortfall is occurring. It's really because you have maybe higher home expenses, and there's a lot more conversation around how all that changes in this scenario. But as a whole, what we're doing is saying, hey, if you're going to have a shortfall, your problem is not just the fact that you're going to have a shortfall. It's the cumulative total of those shortfalls, right? And it increases over year to year. Maybe you get remarried, maybe there's a different, scenario in their head that you want to talk about. But as a whole, there's two different ways to kind of talk about it. It's how does Social Security play in? When does it start and stop in a survivor scenario? And what's the cost benefit? If I'm talking product now of why I would want to position this conversation to someone I might be looking to sell a life insurance policy to, it's really about what is the overall cost of the premium? What is the additional capital that would be required at the death in order to avoid that you could invest or, things like that. And then what is the total of the shortfalls of, if this doesn't happen over time, right? And that's really the problem you're solving for. So for a $30, $40 premium, whatever that number is, to eliminate that amount, let's see, it's additional capital of $649,000. So they need roughly 1.1 million in insurance. And again, very easily just updating that number here on the left for his life insurance benefits. A little bit more than that, but here we've essentially eliminated the shortfall, with this being the total now, right? That's their policy. So you can very easily show them what implementing a policy looks like and how that changes the overall arc of their situation, right? Rather longer question here from Juan. Give me 1 second, Juan, to read this. Advisys model allow the entry of RE properties owned by the applicant. Oh, okay. Yeah. So you're asking about, this is a little off topic, Juan, and I appreciate the question. So in brief, I'll answer. I think what he's asking is, are there ways to illustrate other models of income, like real estate or maybe a side business, things like that in the tool? The answer is yes, in short. We give you this other income sections, other income sources section. Excuse me. I had a terrible speech impediment when I was younger, and S's are difficult when I've been talking for a long time. So forgive me. The income sources section allows you to model out these different things. When they start, when they stop, do they grow over time? Are they paid to a survivor? In the case of like a real estate where they both own it, is it payable for life? So you can do up to 5 different income sources. So there is a little bit of a limit. Again, our claim to fame is keeping it simple. So if they have a more complex scenario, you may want to just kind of consider maybe how to combine things in here. But overall, yes, you can kind of model out some of these things that might impact this. There's also a drop down here for what type of income it is, right? Is it just earnings? Is it an annuity? Is it a pension? Pensions are more rare nowadays, but kind of all of that matters because of this little checkbox here. Is it a benefit that's covered by Social Security or not, right? In the case of those pensions, like we talked about earlier, and I'll get to at the very end here, there's a couple different scenarios where you might get some benefit, but it may be reduced, or you might not want to take that at all because it offsets what you get. There's, again, more questions as they come out of it. But hopefully, Juan, in brief, I can say yes to your question. There's all different kinds of ways to do that. If you have more questions and you're a subscriber, you can just call. We offer unlimited training and support for anyone who uses the Advisys tool. So if you're modeling out or you need help building some cases, just schedule some time with us. We're happy to work with you. Otherwise, the last topic that I kind of want to touch on, and it's a little bit more brief, but it's the D in the OASDI is disability, right? What happens if you're working and you become injured? These are all things that hopefully, if you're kind of the full service model financial planner, or if you're even insurance focused, you're touching on all the different kinds of insurance that might be needed. A good way to kind of bring this topic up, right? This is probably the one that people don't think of or don't understand, that the benefit is probably the least out of what everyone gets of the different categories, right? It is something that you shouldn't rely on primarily, but we want them to understand who is likely to become disabled, right? By percentage, and there's actuary tables and all that on this, but we're pulling information for that. And what is a definition of a disability? That way we can understand who can receive and apply for Social Security disability, right? That is something, and there's short-term and there's long-term, and just kind of helping them understand who would be qualified for that. This is where things like your AFLACs and your short-term things, kind of gap insurances, come in. But really, being a well-rounded in this subject means that you need to be able to talk about OASD and I, right? Or DI. So this is the DI component. What is the worker's benefit? Well, here's, again, it touches on some of the things that we talked about before: who gets what and how much, the percentages therein for spouse, child. And this was, again, one that surprised me before. Even if you're divorced, but if you haven't been remarried, you're still entitled to a portion of that if you need to file for that. But again, there's a maximum, et cetera, and we talk about taxation. I don't want to kind of drill down too much. Really, the point is that each of these reports, sometimes you'll see overlaps, but the general idea is that you're going to use a handful of these, right? You probably don't need all. I think I have 20 or so reports in here. You probably don't need 20, but 5 will do a really good job of explaining all the things that Social Security, needs, and then working it into the needs analysis to be able to explain, how it impacts them in the survivor scenario, how it impacts them when they're saving for retirement, or how the timing of that impacts the amount they're going to receive. All of that comes more back to the data. So it's a handoff always of how do I inform you? And then how do I walk you through the numbers so that it makes sense to you and you can make the right decision for yourself ultimately, right? And then that's all about just trust and rapport. It's just about making sure that they buy into, what it is that and that it, right? So the last things I'm going to touch on, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm going to keep it a little bit more high level because I am supposed to keep these to 45 minutes for everyone, is the offsets, right? This really just has to do with if you work for the government, if you were hired a long time ago before, I think they may have changed it where you do pay into Social Security now. This goes into who's subject to government pension offset. How much is the benefit reduced, right? And there's a little calculation for how they do that. And then we also in the tool have a calculator that kind of helps illustrate the 2/3 rule, and help them understand, depending on what their benefits are, how much might be offset or what might be the best strategy to follow there. And the same thing is true of the windfall elimination provision. It's a similar kind of scenario where, hey, you work for a non-covered employer, and you don't qualify, or, this sometimes, again, comes with a elimination provision where you only get a portion of your benefit over time, right? Depending on how it's calculated, but they use an index. So just being able to explain, the average index of monthly earnings, and this is, again, more of a niche thing if you have people, but this is a really good point to make, that a lot of planners that I've met with, that, and actually where these calculators came from is from people who are like, hey, I work with government employees and they don't really fit into the mold of the Advisys Social Security tools, right? So how do we help them as well? And then we kind of develop those things. So if you are a user or even if you're not a user and you think, you've seen or we're missing something, we'd love to hear from you. That's really how we continue to add the number of reports, and we're up to like 600-700 now that cover everything, because we hear, hey, I talk about this, I talk about that, and then we kind of develop it with our team, and then implement it through the compliance people and get it into the tool, right? So that's kind of what's currently in here. I wanted to leave a little time as well because I wanted to highlight what's coming. I mentioned at the beginning, for those of you who stuck around, you get a look at the upcoming new needs analysis. Right now we have, I think we're up to 16 different modules, right, of needs analysis, covering everything from your personal finance and budgeting, debt, to education planning, retirement, disability. We really cover the gamut here, but all within the context of how do we keep it simple? How do we explain it and make it make sense? And we're going to be adding one more, and that's this Social Security module, right? We've heard, we have all the pieces here, and really what it's about is about putting it together so you can tell a complete story, and maybe adding some layers and touches to it. Because as you saw here, we already have quite a bit. We talk about, the different elimination provisions and how the timing affects it, and we show these different illustrations. But what we're aiming to do with this is kind of combine that all into one story, right? So what it's going to look like, it's going to look similar to the menus that are already there that deal with Social Security. So we're trying to keep it so that it all looks familiar for people that are currently using the tool, right? Meaning that the models will still be there for how you're calculating the benefit. You'll be able to put in things like for distribution, what percent is taxable, what ages they're doing it, except now we're going to give you an extra scenario to show basically 3 different ages and how those 3 different scenarios impact the benefit they receive, the break-even points, and what the benefit looks like over time, right? So this is for about calculating the optimal scenario, which is also something that we didn't go too much into, but one of the options that you have in here is just to check the box and say, hey, let's let the tool decide what the best strategy for the individual or couple is for claiming their benefits. And it has to do, like I said earlier, with if their age gap is wider, let's say there's, someone who is a 15-year, 20-year age gap in their marriage. Guess what? They may want to consider filing for survivor benefits if that person passes away unexpectedly, instead of just taking their own. So we'll kind of run into that and do that. But we're going to continue to do the optimal scenario. And then the second half of it is illustrating that strategy in different ways, right? So like I showed here, it's about the 2 different learning styles. There's the people who are absolutely more analytical. They need to see the numbers. And so we're going to give them that timeline view, what it looks like over time, for the optimal strategy, as well as the 2 alternate start years that we mentioned. So here we have, this is their optimal strategy, which means that they're claiming for benefit at 70, and then Sally's filing for survivor benefits when Paul passes away when she's 88, versus taking it at 62 or taking it at 67. Right. And this is the timeline for each of those. And we can kind of show that optimal strategy. And then furthermore, we'll show that in a graph in a break even, scenario 1, which is the optimal, and then 2 and 3 compared to optimal over time as a break-even chart, right? So we can kind of start to see why it's important to take ownership of those assets, but in a little bit more clear picture. So everything's not separated, right? This is going to bring everything together and show the picture in one frame. The last report that we'll highlight here is the benefit paid over time. Right. So here you see the reduction in the benefit when the first individual passes away. But again, comparing scenario 1, which is our optimal, to what's left on the table in scenario 2 and 3. Right. So here we see the total benefits are much less in scenario 2, and just kind of a different way of illustrating that. Again, one page, staying true to what Advisys has always done, is let's break it down into a single page if we can and show you what you need to know. Right. So at this point, you kind of seen what we have for Social Security, but it's kind of up to you guys to figure out how this works for your process. So as I kind of flip back to my last thing, I'll say, this webinar was meant to be both informative for people who don't fully understand Social Security, or maybe weren't sure if they knew it all, or kind of had a depth of understanding, but also to help the people that are using Advisys figure out how to work it into their process as it pertains to using the reports we offer. And if you've seen some of the things here and you go, oh, you know what, that looks like a way that I could do it, and you don't currently subscribe, we want to kind of get you enticed and show you that there's a lot that this tool provides that is beyond what most planning tools do. Someone said to me one time at a show that it's their only everyday use software, because how many different things are in there. And what I put together today is like a small percentage on one topic. But if you have someone who has a question, chances are there's a report you can pull from Advisys that provides some sort of tangible value or explanation. And so if you sat through me for 45 minutes today, you get a couple $100 off. The typical price for the full, there's two different versions. Essentially, the education version does not provide any of the needs analysis that we mentioned. That would include the upcoming Social Security needs analysis. It does, however, provide all the explainer reports and base calculators that we showed today for Social Security, like the break even, as a part of that package. The full version has all those 16 needs analysis, as well as, the training and support included. So if you want to, learn how to present a life insurance case or something like that, if you're a financial planner, we'll kind of walk you through all of that. But that's $798, and that's once a year, right? So we always say, make one sale and it's paid for. And then better than that, we give you 60 days. So we always say the proof is in the pudding. Let us work with you and make something, put something together for an individual that you want to have this conversation with. Social Security is a great one to do it with, and see if it resonates with them. If it does, keep your subscription. If it doesn't, return it and get your full money back. That's kind of the ask. So for everyone still here, I just want to thank you and encourage you guys to interact with us. We post a lot of stuff on our LinkedIn that is relevant to the different reports that we cover, the conversations that we can allow you to have. So if you don't already, really trying to get people to kind of engage with us there, and talk with us about their experience. I'd love to hear from you and kind of learn a little bit more about what's working and what's not working for you. So if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out. I'm going to leave that here. I'm going to stay on for the last couple minutes that I have before the end of the hour and answer any remaining questions, or take any other concerns. Otherwise, again, the session's recorded, and I'd be happy to talk with anyone else that has concerns. Clint, looks like you want to talk. We only have is everyone leaving? Let's see if I can unmute you. Okay, you should have permission to speak if you want. Otherwise, if you don't want to, you can just go ahead and type anything out that you had to say. Use the Q&A or the chat if you prefer. People don't have access to the chat. And if you accidentally raise your hand, that's okay too. I'll just hang tight. Okay, Edward, if you are a subscriber and you're interested in upgrading the full version, just give us a call at the 800 number. They'll pass you through to the department that would handle that. It's the sales department. You just change your subscription. They'll prorate the amount based on when your renewal is. Might take a little calculation, but that's something that you can absolutely just give us a call if you're interested in upgrading to the full version. Doc, so great to see you, my friend. Thank you. This is part of what I was preparing for this week. So apologies for not getting back to you yet, but trying to get ready to do this. Have Medicare deductibles been updated for 2024? Tom, good question. We're currently working on the 2024 package now. That'll be part of our December update. So I don't think the Medicare numbers are there yet, but I think we were late getting a lot of the figures from who we get, the body that we get them from. So, I can update you separately on that, but not yet. I'll give you a little more information on when that's coming out. We'll send out an email as well. So, yeah, for those of you still here, happy to review any of this with you guys, or you can always schedule time with us right through our website, or like I said, through one of these other channels that we have up here. So at this point, I think we've hit everyone. So I want to thank the last handful of people for hanging on as long as you have. And if you're just there listening to my voice and not paying attention and doing something else, we hope to see you next time too. All right. Thank you again, and everyone have a great day.